Have you ever felt like you're running on a treadmill? Working harder and harder, but you're not really getting anywhere? Or maybe you've been at the grocery store and just wondered, why does everything cost so much more than it used to? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden mechanics of inflation, debt, and the wealth gap that really shape our world. Let's dive in. Okay, let's start with a number that is, well, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. $90 trillion. That is the grand total of all debt in the United States right now. We're talking government debt, corporate debt, all the way down to household mortgages and credit cards. To put that into perspective, that works out to about $270,000 for every single man, woman, and child in the country. It's just a staggering amount of money. So that's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? What happens with a debt that big? How does it ever get paid back? Well, the answer, it turns out, is hidden in a pattern that repeats over and over again throughout history. It's a pattern that quietly, almost invisibly, shifts wealth from one group of people to another. Our source material points to one clear answer for how governments have always dealt with this kind of massive debt: inflation. And it's not some far-off theory. You've seen it at the gas pump. You've seen it on your energy bills. This isn't an accident. It's a core feature of the system. This is what's known as the debt inflation spiral. It's not a new concept. In fact, it's a cycle that's played out from ancient Rome to modern times. Once you see this pattern, you start to understand exactly what's happening to the money in your wallet right now. So if inflation is the tool being used, it's crucial to ask who gets hurt and who actually benefits. To get to the bottom of that, we have to look at the two fundamentally different ways people build wealth. Think about it this way. Earning is linear. It's like climbing a ladder. You trade your time for money one step at a time. Owning, on the other hand, is like planting a forest. It grows on its own, compounding over time, even when you're not actively working on it. This single distinction becomes absolutely critical when inflation enters the picture. This is the playbook. It explains why the rich tend to get richer, especially during inflationary times. It's not about working more hours in the day. It's about owning the assets, the businesses, the real estate that actually grow faster than your cost of living. It's about using a system that, frankly, most of us were never taught how to play. So how did we end up with a system like this in the first place? How did we build this machine that seems to favor owners and debtors so heavily? Well, the answer, believe it or not, has a whole lot to do with war. Just let that sink in for a moment. This simple, yet incredibly powerful idea is really the blueprint for our entire modern financial system. It created this permanent, self-perpetuating cycle of government borrowing and banker profits. And you can see how this model was perfected over the centuries. From the Napoleonic Wars all the way through the World Wars, the story was the same. Wars create a desperate need for money, which leads to massive government debt. And all of this eventually led to the US dollar being crowned the world's primary reserve currency. But for this debt machine to truly be unleashed, there was one last barrier that had to be removed. One thing was still holding the system in check: gold. For the machine to run at full speed, governments needed the ability to create money, literally out of thin air. And in 1971, that's precisely what happened. President Nixon severed the US dollar's last link to gold. This turned it into what's called a fiat currency, which basically just means it has value because the government says it does, not because it's backed by a physical thing. And that one move, well, it opened the floodgates. And here you can see the result. This chart shows what's called the M2 money supply, basically all the cash and easy-to-access money floating around the US economy. And just look at that spike in such a short period of time. It's a 38% increase in just a few years. And what happens when you have way more money chasing the same amount of goods and services? Prices go up. That, in a nutshell, is the inflation you've been feeling. Okay, so now we see how all the pieces fit together. We've got the debt, we've got the unlimited money printing. So what's the consequence? This is where we see the great wealth transfer really kick into high gear. This four-step pattern isn't a theory. It's a historical blueprint. It's happened again and again. You start with a solid currency. Then the government starts printing to pay its bills. Before long, inflation starts running hot, just wiping out the value of savings for regular people. And finally, you get a reset. But by then, the real wealth has already moved into the hands of those who owned tangible assets. This table lays it out perfectly. The losers? savers holding cash, retirees on a fixed pension, and pretty much anyone whose paycheck isn't keeping up with rising prices. But the winners? They're the ones who own the real stuff: stocks, real estate, and interestingly, people in governments with large amounts of debt because they get to pay it back with money that's worth less. It's a hidden tax on savers and wage earners. So, I know this can all sound pretty overwhelming, but the point here isn't to give you specific financial advice. It's about understanding the fundamental rules of the game we're all playing, so you can start making more informed decisions for your own future. Really, the biggest takeaway from all of our source material is this: start thinking more like an owner and not just an earner. That means focusing on acquiring assets that can grow over time, understanding how to use debt wisely, and above all, playing the long game. You know, the patterns and mechanisms we've talked about today have been in play for centuries. They don't really change. Now that you can see the playbook, now that you understand how the system is designed, the only question left is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? Thanks for joining us.